Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, it's called the Torture Report. A Senate committee finds that the Bush administration's aggressive interrogation techniques damaged the collection of accurate intelligence, undermined U.S. credibility, and strengthened the hand of our enemies. We speak with Devon Chaffee of Human Rights First, and with Dan Marcus, General Counsel to the 9/11 Commission and former Associate Attorney General, about the Bush administration's legacy and what needs fixed at the Department of Justice. Also, a conference that aims to unite labor and environmentalists around a climate and jobs-friendly stimulus program. We chat with Roxanne Brown of the Steelworkers Union. We've got poetry by Greta Ehrig. Reuben Jackson reviews a book about three 70s-era pop divas, and Curtis Blues, the one-man blues band.
Don't let your man go today.
On the Coffee House. Welcome to the forum at the Coffee House. When we first saw the pictures of American troops humiliating Iraqi prisoners at the Abu Ghraib prison, most of us thought it was an isolated instance in which some low-level bad apples got out of control. Then the same for reports about waterboarding of prisoners. But a bipartisan report of the Senate Armed Services Committee finds otherwise. Indeed, a New York Times editorial summarizing the Senate committee report finds it makes a, quote, strong case for bringing criminal charges against former Defense Secretary Rumsfeld and White House counsel Alberto Gonzales. Wow. With us to discuss the report and why there is a growing call for hearings, criminal charges, or a truth commission is Devon Chaffee, advocacy counsel for Human Rights First in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Devon, to the Coffee House.
Thank you, Mark.
Let's begin with the findings of the Senate Armed Services Committee report. It found that the Bush administration authorized the use of aggressive interrogation techniques that were essentially vintage Chinese communist conduct used on American troops in Korea. Is that correct?
That is correct. I mean, these techniques are particularly harsh techniques. They were used by the Chinese. They were also used by the Soviet Gulag. The techniques involved things like waterboarding, which is perhaps the most widely known. That involves strapping someone to a board and pouring water over their face to induce the sense of drowning. It also involved other very coercive interrogation methods, such as forced standing, when other stress positions, forcing somebody to stand for hours on end, strapping them to an eye bolt in the floor so they have to crouch. Other types of techniques that were also approved involve exposure to extreme temperatures, extreme cold or extreme heat, sensory deprivation, keeping someone up for extended periods of time, sometimes up to 48 hours, and also sensory bombardment and sensory deprivation.
Now, when the Chinese communists used this against American soldiers, though, their goal was to extract false confessions. In what sense can it be said that these techniques might be effective in extracting useful intelligence?
Well, certainly the interrogation experts that Human Rights First has spoken with, and we gathered about 16 expert interrogators in Washington last summer, and they all tell us that these types of techniques don't extract any you can't get actionable intelligence by using coercive methods. Really, the way that they know to extract intelligence is by building rapport with the individuals who you're interviewing. And in fact, using coercive methods can also often lead to false information, lead to false leads. It tends to waste time, and it can also create a situation where that individual is never going to give you good information, because you can't go back from coercive interrogation. You can't then start to build a rapport with that individual. You can disrupt the relationship so that you'll never be able to get good information down the line from the detainee.
All fine and good if you have plenty of time, but what about the ticking time bomb circumstance where you need that intelligence right now because you fear that there's an imminent attack in which thousands of civilians might be injured?
So essentially, you're describing what has been sort of known as the 24 scenario that we see Jack Bauer on the TV show 24. I believe
24.
Yeah. It just the new season just started this week, and I think that it's really that type of description of a scenario is a red herring. First of all, it is dependent upon the idea that in a quick amount of time, you can get good information by using coercive interrogation techniques, and there's nothing out there. There's no evidence proving that if you have an hour or 2 hours and you torture somebody, that you'll get that good information. It's simply not, there's no evidence proving that. Certain studies done by the Defense Science College indicate that there is absolutely no scientific evidence that you can get good information in a short amount of time.
The Senate Armed Services Committee report goes back to the presidential determination that the United States would no longer honor Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions as setting off the chain of circumstances leading to Abu Ghraib. Could that really be established in any plausible sense that there is a direct linkage between these events?
Well, certainly legal memos that were issued by the Department of Justice stating that Common Article 3 did not apply to the Taliban or Al-Qaeda appear to have been intended to give legal cover for the type of coerced interrogations that were used in Guantanamo, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Some of these techniques were beginning to be employed before those types of legal memos were issued, but it's clear that Common Article 3 would have prohibited all of these techniques. None of these techniques, and the military, anyone that you ask in the military, including the top military lawyers, what we call TJAGs, Judge Advocate Generals, will say very easily that all of these techniques violate Common Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions.
And indeed, many people in the military, in a very honorable way, came forward and said that we shouldn't be doing this.
Yes, absolutely, and they've come out a number of times saying so, and one of the reasons why military leaders feel so strongly about the need to uphold Common Article 3, whether we're talking about the Department of Defense or we're talking about agents from the CIA or any U.S. government agency, is because once you start to degrade that standard, you start putting U.S. troops and U.S. personnel who are stationed abroad in danger, because they rely on that standard for protection should they be taken into custody. And that's why you have seen so many military leaders. Human Rights First at one point helped organize a letter where over 50 admirals, former admirals and generals signed on to a letter advocating that Common Article 3 be upheld and that there be a single standard for all U.S. agencies when it comes to interrogation and humane treatment of prisoners. Now,
the degradation in U.S. policy and treatment began at Guantanamo, then moved to Afghanistan, and then from Afghanistan to Iraq. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, who authorized the use of aggressive techniques, would you say that he thought that even what he authorized wasn't really, he thought he was being pretty restrained, didn't he? He made some joking comments, in fact, about forcing people to stand up for extended periods of time as some kind of torture, right?
Essentially, I think, well, if you look at the legal memos, there were some proposed methods in those legal memos, such as beatings, a pretty severe form of interrogation that Rumsfeld declined to authorize, but he did authorize a number of other cruel techniques. And in one of these memos, he did write with, you can see it, it's a publicly available document, it's available on the web. He wrote with his own hand that he didn't understand why you could only make someone stand for 4 hours because he stood 8 hours a day in his job, which clearly doesn't take into account the fact that when you're holding somebody against their will, forcing them to stand often in positions that are made to create pain, and can, in fact, cause severe risk to health and even to life because of the fear of blood clots. Those types of circumstances and risks are obviously not associated when somebody's simply standing for
Let's talk about
work.
the case of Mohammed al-Qahtani. Tell me about his detention and what happened to him.
Well, Mohammed al-Qahtani was, he had tried to enter the United States in 2001 at the Miami airport and was in fact refused. And that's the first, what he's accused of, having tried to enter the United States to participate in the 9/11 attacks. He was then eventually detained by the U.S. government and was one of the first detainees subject to some of the cruelest techniques. Eventually, al-Qahtani was brought to Guantanamo. The entire log of his interrogation is also publicly available, and it includes some very horrific treatment, including use of hypothermia. He was in fact reportedly hospitalized for hypothermia because of the cold temperatures that he was subjected to in his interrogation. He was also reportedly subjected to severe humiliation, as well as forced standing and other abusive measures during his interrogation.
And what was the outcome? What were the findings ultimately in his case?
Well, there have been no ultimate findings in his case at this point. Not all of the information regarding his interrogation is public. If you look at the Department of Justice Inspector General report, a lot of the part of that report on his interrogation is in fact redacted. And it's also not clear yet whether or not there will be any successful charges against al-Qahtani. There were initially charges brought, and then those charges were dropped. There were assertions made that the charges were dropped because some of the information had been gathered through coercive and abusive interrogations. However, recently in November 2008, charges were brought again in the military commission system. When the prosecutor brought those charges, they claimed that there was new evidence that wasn't relied on coercive interrogation. So we'll see, where we go from here. The hope would be that if any charges are brought against al-Qahtani, they would be brought in the regular U.S. federal criminal courts. That's
in a new administration, and President-elect now, soon-to-be President Obama, saying that he will not authorize the use of torture, that we're going to abide by the Geneva Conventions. But going back in time, looking back at what's happened, he also says that we're not going to bring criminal charges probably unless somebody has blatantly broken the law, an unusual legal standard for sure. What is your sense about to what extent should we be attempting to hold criminally accountable the Bush administration and the principals in the Bush administration that were responsible for the torture policy?
Well, it's a difficult question politically, I think. What I am glad to see that President-elect Obama hasn't taken anything off the table at this point, which I think is important. And there are some discrete ways in which they can leave open this possibility. One being there is an ongoing investigation into the destruction of certain CIA tapes of cruel interrogation. And one of our suggestions is that investigation be expanded to include not just the destruction of the tapes, but the infliction and the authorization of the techniques on the tapes. So I think there are still some more discrete ways in which they might look at the potential for bringing criminal prosecutions should the evidence warrant. Obviously, there are a number of potential defenses that could be brought that might prevent legal defenses that might prevent such cases being brought, including issues having to do with the chain of command and legal authorization. And those defenses were enshrined into law in the Detainee Treatment Act and the Military Commissions Act that was passed in 2006. But certainly, he shouldn't be taking any forms of accountability off the counter at this point until he really has a chance to look through all of the documents and understand exactly who was involved and how these techniques came to be authorized. And certainly, there should be a fuller accounting of what actually happened. We're
going to have to leave it right there, but many thanks to Devon Chaffee of Human Rights First for walking us through the legal, ethical, and policy issues associated with U.S. treatment of prisoners, enemy combatants, and terrorist suspects, and more on this coming up in a minute. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Coffee House Forum.
The two pink houses on Swinks Mill Road one new, the other old, stand like sentinels in the December cold, keeping watch over each flake of snow that slicks the crossings of Swinks Mill Road. The two pink houses on Swinks Mill Road, whether plain and small or Mediterranean and sprawling, shiver to hear winter's thaw ever earlier along Swinks Mill Road. The two pink houses on Swinks Mill Road, witnessing bamboo and backhoes that chase raccoons and peepers from their vernal pools, dream of sycamores on Swinks Mill Road. The two pink houses on Swinks Mill Road resemble the gold that built them, the bits and bars connecting then to now, and the who knows when that's somewhere down Swinks Mills Road. The two pink houses on Swinks Mill Road know such riches and poverty too. Daily they see each vehicle cut through and learn which Zoom belongs to whom, those wise windows on Swinks Mill Road. The two pink houses on Swinks Mill Road gaze not upon each other, yet, like twin twilights familiar as brothers, they love the self-same color that's dawn and dusk on Swinks Mill Road. The two pink houses on Swinks Mill Road remember summer's most flagrant joys, now buried beneath frozen toys, and the haunted psyche of every boy who ever down at Swinks Mill Road. The two pink houses on Swinks Mill Road, both gated and guarded, keep out peddlers, pilgrims, and poets about to trespass, alarm, stir up and shout past dooryards and doors on Swinks Mill Road. The two pink houses on Swinks Mill Road. Each day I pass them with my little load of quarter, half, and whole notes, spilling out old-fashioned hopes for all the futures of Swinks Mill Road.
The United States Department of Justice has been plagued with controversies and scandals for the past 8 years. From the endorsement of coercive interrogation tactics and torture to the politically motivated firing of 9 United States attorneys and the resignation of former Attorney General Alberto Gonzales, the Obama administration will inherit a Justice Department in dire need of reform. Here to tell us what the new administration needs to do to restore integrity to the Justice Department is former Associate Attorney General Dan Marcus. Welcome, Dan, to the Coffee House.
Thank you, Angela.
Dan, there have been a number of very controversial decisions made by upper-level Justice Department officials during the last 8 years, and you served as the Associate Attorney General during the Clinton administration, and you've been one of the constitutional scholars that's been very critical of this Justice Department. First of all, tell me what you think are the most troubling decisions that this Justice Department has made.
Well, I think the problems are in 2 or 3 areas. One of them is the issuance by the Office of Legal Counsel, which is the part of the Justice Department that is the advisor to the President and the executive branch as to the meaning of statutes and the meaning of the Constitution. Opinions that they've issued that really went beyond what most of us think is a reasonable interpretation of the law and authorized actions by the President and the CIA and others in the war on terror that most scholars believe violated federal statutes or the Constitution.
Such as?
Well, the most notorious one is the so-called torture opinion, which we would not even have known about because it was a secret opinion of the Department of Justice had it not been leaked to the press, and then it was released, which was troublesome for 2 reasons. One, it had a very narrow definition of torture, which in retrospect was clearly designed to permit techniques like waterboarding to be used without violating the federal criminal statute banning torture. The second troublesome part of it, which was even more shocking to us constitutional law professors, was that the opinion rather gratuitously said that in a war authorized by Congress, like the war against al-Qaeda, that if the president determined that it was necessary to torture people, to torture detainees to obtain intelligence information, he could do it, and that it would be unconstitutional under the separation of powers doctrine to apply the criminal torture statute to the president or to persons operating under his authorization. That opinion was so shocking to not only lawyers, but to the American public and to the world, that the Justice Department actually had to withdraw that opinion and replace it with a more sensible opinion. And since that second opinion was issued, the government has stopped doing waterboarding, apparently.
So those actions by the Office of Legal Counsel, and that office is, of course, within the Justice Department.
That's correct. And that office has had historically a reputation for integrity and for calling it as it sees it, in giving objective advice to the president and to other executive branch officials. And I think...
So what happened here? I mean, why do you think it happened under this administration?
Well, that's a very good question. I think it happened because of a lack of leadership at the top of the Justice Department on the part of Attorney General Ashcroft and Attorney General Gonzalez. I think it happened because the White House, led by Vice President Cheney and his counsel, David Addington, played a major role in the shaping of these legal opinions by the Department of Justice. And I think it also reflected kind of an accident of history, if you will, that the Office of Legal Counsel at this time was dominated by people who had an unusually muscular view, if you will, of presidential authority, especially the authority of the president as commander-in-chief.
So how does this work, though? Because, right, the Office of Legal Counsel is within the Justice Department, which is also part of the executive branch, correct? Which means that the White House, or the president, if you will, is really the boss, technically, of the... So how does it ever work that that office can give an independent, a truly independent opinion to the president?
Well, you've put your finger on a difficult tightrope, if you will, that the Attorney General and the Office of Legal Counsel have to walk, because they are the president's lawyers.
Right.
And the president is the head of the executive branch, and if he doesn't like an opinion that he gets from his Attorney General, he can overrule it.
Right.
But we live in a nation where the rule of law is important. The Attorney General is the chief legal officer of the Department of the executive branch of the government, really. And presidents and attorney generals over the years have realized that it's important for the Attorney General to be somewhat independent of the president. Everyone expects, when the Office of Legal Counsel gives an opinion about the president's authority, that if it's a close question, they'll call it the president's way. And so there's a natural inclination of the Office of Legal Counsel and the Justice Department to support the president's constitutional prerogatives, and that's fine. But what was so troubling about the torture memorandum and several other of the opinions issued by the Office of Legal Counsel in this administration is that they went far beyond the sort of norm of OLC opinions, and really reached conclusions that most scholars thought were beyond the pale. And I think one of the most important things for the new administration to do, the president and the new Attorney General, is to reestablish the integrity and independence of the Department of Justice, and particularly the Office of Legal Counsel.
I want to talk in the few minutes we have remaining about the firings of those 9 United States attorneys by Alberto Gonzales. Can you explain just briefly a little bit about what happened there? Everybody's saying that they were politically motivated, that they were not routine firings, that this rarely, if ever, has happened in the history of the Justice Department.
Well, we don't know all the facts yet, and as you know, there's a pending criminal investigation. Attorney General Mukasey appointed a career prosecutor from one of the U.S. Attorney's offices to be a special investigator. And there's a grand jury, and there may well be indictments and prosecution. So we don't know all the facts yet. But what we know already is enough to cause great concern, because what U.S. attorneys are the frontline prosecutors for the United States government. And it's absolutely vital that the public have confidence in the integrity of prosecutorial decisions. And most presidents and most attorneys general have recognized that and established procedures to ensure that White House officials cannot have contact with prosecutors and with the criminal division of the Justice Department with respect to particular prosecutorial decisions. And that firewall, if you will, was breached to some extent. We know that already. We know that at least one U.S. senator called a United States attorney to ask him whether he was going to prosecute an official of the opposing party in his state before the election or not. We know that Karl Rove was involved in this process of reviewing the U.S. attorneys and may have had contacts with the Justice Department. And so we know that there were problems that undermined public confidence. I think that those problems are going to be remedied. And I think that going forward, the integrity of the prosecution process is going to be protected.
How so? I mean, what's the Obama administration need to do to make sure that that happens?
Yeah, Attorney General Mukasey, who hasn't done everything that a lot of us hoped he would do, has done some good things. And one of the good things he did very early on was to work out a new set of guidelines with the White House on permissible contacts between White House officials and the Justice Department. And under the new guidelines, which are similar to the Clinton administration guidelines, Karl Rove cannot talk to Karl Rove or other political operatives in the White House cannot talk to people in the Justice Department
not just Karl Rove,
about pending
Karl
cases. The Karl Roves of the world.
The Karl Roves of the world. Okay. Hopefully there won't be any more of those.
But I think in the last analysis, it's important to have these kinds of procedures. But what's really important is to have the public commitments of the President and the Attorney General to maintaining the integrity. There's no substitute for having a President who understands the importance of the integrity and independence of the Justice Department and an Attorney General who's committed to preserving the integrity and independence of the Justice Department.
Let me just interrupt you right there because we're almost out of time. I do want to get your take on what, if anything, should be done. Accountability. I mean, there have been a number of organizations, the ACLU, the Center for Constitutional Rights, and others who have called for a wide-ranging investigation of Justice Department officials. Do you think that's going to happen? Should it happen? And if not, where's the accountability? How can these people ever be held accountable to the people?
Well, I think it's very important that the officials of any administration be held accountable for what they're doing. And that applies to the President, to the Vice President, to Justice Department officials. I think that the investigations and the exposures by the press so far have already gone a substantial way in that direction. I think we understand a lot of the problems, a lot of the distortions and violations of the law that took place. And I think
But how about holding those people accountable?
Yeah. Well, I think there are some serious, in terms of holding them accountable criminally, it's not so easy because the CIA officials who authorized or conducted waterboarding did so with a legal opinion in their hand from the Justice Department that said, this is not torture, and don't worry about Common Article 3 because that doesn't apply to Al-Qaeda and Taliban detainees. I think that President-elect Obama is probably right in thinking that there's not much to be gained from a pursuit of high-level former officials from a criminal prosecution standpoint. I think further investigations by congressional committees or by a special commission that lays out all the facts could be useful. I think that makes sense. But I wouldn't hold my breath about criminal prosecutions.
Thanks, Dan Marcus, for sharing your important insights on the Justice Department. I'm sure we all look forward to a newly revived Justice Department that will enforce the laws and uphold the Constitution. I'm Angela Davis, and this has been Courting Justice.
What do Joni Mitchell, Carole King, and Carly Simon have in common? For author Sheila Weller, who has deftly charted their careers in Girls Like Us, Carole King, Joni Mitchell, Carly Simon, and The Journey of a Generation, it's the intersections and divergent paths that form this book's compelling arc. And yet Weller does a masterful job of weaving the lives and accomplishments of the Brooklyn-born King, Canadian-born Mitchell, and the Long Island-born Carly Simon into a broader generational context. Their development as singers and songwriters in a world traditionally dominated by men is as much a part of Girls as Weller's glimpses into their personal lives and the sociological changes occurring around them. But thankfully, this isn't one of those deadly dull treatises on the 1960s, nor is it a litany of who slept with whom on such and such a date. Yes, romantic tales abound, along with artistic and other personal highs and lows. Still, their presence is as crucial to the story as a good backbeat is to rock and roll. I don't know how Weller managed to create a literary version of what the rapper KRS-One calls edutainment, but Girls is a hard book to put down. I only wish more authors attempting books of this nature had her knack for storytelling. Girls Like Us is highly recommended. I'd loan you mine, but come to think of it, I didn't let anyone borrow my copy of Carole King's Tapestry either. For Writer's Block, I'm Reuben Jackson.
Welcome to Work Life at the Coffee House. The stimulus package under consideration by Congress is supposed to create millions of new jobs. The question is, what kinds of jobs? Some say it should create new green jobs that both stimulate the economy and address critical environmental needs. But others say that repairing our infrastructure by rebuilding roads and bridges is more shovel-ready and therefore will be more effective in addressing the economic crisis we face. The labor movement is likely to be a significant voice in this debate. Where do the unions stand on what kinds of jobs the stimulus package should create? We are fortunate to have with us today Roxanne Brown, who is the Assistant Legislative Director of the Steelworkers Union and also serves on the steering committee of the Blue-Green Alliance. Roxanne, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Fred, for having me.
So why don't we start by tell us, what is the Blue-Green Alliance?
Well, the Blue-Green Alliance is a strategic partnership between the United Steelworkers, the Sierra Club, the Communication Workers of America, the National Resources Defense Council, the Service Employees International Union, and the Laborers International Union. And I know that's a mouthful. It was formed 2 years ago, well, 3 years ago now, in 2006. And originally it was just the Steelworkers and the Sierra Club.
So that's quite an interesting mix of unions. You have construction unions in there, service unions and industrial unions, and you have some of the leading environmental groups. So how did it come to pass that this alliance of environmental groups and labor unions came into being? 'Cause often we hear that there's sort of a tension between some of the unions and the environmentalists.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I mentioned, it started with our union and the Sierra Club, and for us it was just a natural progression of a relationship that's existed for almost 40 years. Our union is an industrial union, and we represent members in historically dirty industries, and steel and aluminum and chemicals and paper and rubber, and the list goes on. And our leadership has always felt that it was their role and our role as a union to ensure that our employers are good corporate citizens who ensure that the environment that our members live and work in is a clean one. And so we've worked with the Sierra Club, we've worked with the National Resources Defense Council now for, as I mentioned, almost 40 years. And so this alliance was just a natural progression of that relationship that we've had together around policies like the Clean Air Act and the Toxics Release Inventory.
So brings us to today, where we have this humongous stimulus package pending before Congress. Where do you stand on it? What do you think are some of the most important issues, and how do you think that that package can relate to some of the environmental causes that your union has been promoting?
Well, you know, we definitely think that the stimulus package is necessary, that economic recovery package is absolutely necessary to stimulate the economy, which has been in a free fall now for quite some time. And we think that it can accomplish two things. It can revitalize domestic manufacturing and also the domestic construction industry, but it can also lay the groundwork for the emerging green economy. You know, we, as I mentioned, our members work in commodities-based industries who have taken a significant hit over the past few years. We just saw the jobs numbers come out last Friday. Unemployment's at 7.2%. And there have been about 2.6 million jobs lost in 2008 alone, and a lot of those jobs are in the manufacturing and construction industries. And so we think that this package is absolutely necessary for rebuilding our nation's infrastructure, our schools, our roads, our bridges, et cetera. And the products our members make go into building those projects, excuse me. And we strongly believe that there needs to be domestic sourcing policies placed into the economic recovery package to ensure that the projects that are created under this bill using federal funds are done so using products that are domestically sourced, because we think that's necessary for, number one, revitalizing manufacturing, but also ensuring that those construction jobs are created in here in the United States.
But then what about this question of promoting an energy efficient, environmentally sound economic growth for the future? I mean, some of those projects that you're mentioning, how does that relate to promoting that kind of economy in the future?
Well, there's a lot of talk about energy efficiency being a part of this, and obviously that is key to putting us on the road to a green recovery. But also the products, again, that go into those energy efficient buildings or schools are made using a lot of the products that our members make, windows and doors and things like this. But we're not also just focusing on that, but also other policies like the production tax credit, which was extended for a year. And this is a tax credit that drives investment in the wind and solar industries. And when this tax credit is in place, you see that there is growth in the United States economy in these industries. And you know, it was extended for a year, and we'd like to see a long-term extension of that tax credit to lay a long-term road and path for emerging green economies like wind and solar.
But is this approach unanimous amongst all of the unions? I mean, you hear that there are some of the unions are more, because their membership is more focused on more traditional industries, are more focused on infrastructure growth and are concerned that too much in the stimulus package that goes towards developing these kinds of future policies on energy efficiency and environmentally friendly policies won't be as effective as stimulus, and therefore they're saying this isn't the place to promote this kind of future evolution. Do you see some of that amongst your colleagues, amongst other unions?
That discussion, you know, it definitely has taken place, but I think for the most part, everyone agrees that this economic recovery package is absolutely necessary, and everyone agrees that it's going to take many different pieces to create a package that will stimulate the economy in the way that it needs that needs to be done. There are some unions absolutely that would like to see most money spent on infrastructure because those are construction jobs. But I think at the same time they recognize that it's important to start laying energy policies in place, lay the groundwork and putting these energy policies in place that will ultimately create new jobs in the emerging green economy. So I definitely think that unions are looking at it in both ways.
Tell us a little bit more about this relationship, this apparently strengthening relationship. You say it goes back a long time, but it does seem to be, the Blue-Green Alliance has been there now for 3 years and seems to be growing. It started out with just the steel workers, I believe, in the Sierra Club, and then it's added more. Tell me a little bit about this relationship. I could understand how the steel workers are investing in these kinds of environmentally friendly policies because it sees it's in its interest. What does the environmental movement see is in its interest in developing these relationships with the labor movement?
I think there's strength in numbers, and I think it's extremely powerful when you have a steelworker from Ohio and an organizer from the Sierra Club from Ohio go up on the Hill together and talk about a policy that will ultimately affect the community in a better way. I think that's extremely powerful, and we've seen that around issues like the renewable portfolio standard, which would require that large electric utilities generate a portion of their electricity by a certain date. It takes people do a double take essentially when you have a steelworker and a Sierra Club member hand in hand on the Hill talking about these issues that will ultimately place our nation on the path towards energy independence and also create jobs. And that's, I think, what is attractive to both labor and environmental organizations that are part of the Blue-Green Alliance. But also, I think the environmentalists realize that union workplaces are inherently safer workplaces. Union workplaces often have training programs. Workers are better trained to deal with dangerous work situations. And I think that they see the benefit in that and want to continue working with us to ensure that our workplaces do continue to be clean and healthy places to work.
I know you've been working hard on a conference that's coming up in February that addresses many of the things we've been talking about here today, the intersection between environmental issues and labor issues and union growth. Tell us about that conference. When is it? Tell us.
It's called the Good Jobs, Green Jobs Conference, and it will take place February 4th through 6th of this year, just a couple of weeks away. And we had our very first conference in 2008, in February of 2008 in Pittsburgh. So this is our second conference, and it's much expanded. We expect to have about 2,000 people from labor, from the environmental community, from academia, students, and also businesses. And it's essentially bringing together all of these communities to have workshops and hear from speakers like Governor Sebelius from Kansas and Amy Klobuchar, who's a senator from Minnesota, and to also network And a good portion of it is an advocacy day which will take place on February 4th. And so again, that strength in numbers, we'll have representatives from labor and environment and business and academia up on the Hill together, lobbying around a lot of the issues that we've been talking about today.
Right around the time the stimulus package is coming to a head.
Yes, it's very timely.
Well, thank you, Roxanne Brown, for your insights on these important issues. Working people across the country have a lot at stake in the stimulus legislation now pending before Congress. Will the stimulus package be able to both provide relief from the economic crisis we face and steer the country towards an energy-efficient economic growth? It's one of the most important challenges we face. I'm Fred Feinstein, and this has been Work Life.
Texas, mama, yeah, they were loping just like a mule. Say when the blues come out of Texas, mama, you know they were loping just like a mule. Yeah, but those Texas women, man, you know they're just too hard to fool. Understand. I said I love you, pretty baby. I just hope you understand. That I don't want to marry, babe. I just want to be your man. Nothing, yeah, but a low down shaky chill. I said the blues ain't nothing, mama, just a low down shaky chill. If you never had the blues, mama, then I hope you never will. Texas, mama, man, they were loping just like a mule. I say when the blues come out of Texas, mama, they were loping just like a mule. Yeah, those Texas women, man, you know they're just too hard to fool.
Big Joe Williams.
Was.
Traveling man.
Welcome to the Coffee House, Curtis.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. You know, I realize you're one of the few acts we've had here where we don't need to tell people, now be sure and turn off your cell phones because it'll interfere. It's blasting right over them. That's great. How'd you get into this music?
Well, when I was 14 years old, there was a folk revival, and that was a lot of people who were looking into the roots of rock music. And I heard
Give me
somebody,
a year. What year are we talking about?
So we're talking about 1969, and
Yeah.
And I first heard somebody play a harmonica in this unique way, which was an innovation musically. They took the European harmonica, but they didn't play it like the Europeans. They changed
Right.
the shape of their mouth to bend a note. So I
Right.
heard somebody taking a note like this and turn it into this.
Sort of sliding over and bending the reed.
Yeah, and so that flatted the notes, and I'm actually 5 chromatic steps away from my guitar, but I bend it back to the guitar. But it makes
Right.
it much more like the human voice. And I was so gripped by that sound, you know, I really felt that that's the sound of how I feel.
And you were 14 at the
Exactly
time?
right. And fortunately, at that time, it was more accessible. I think it was
Yeah.
really, although now, of course, we've got all these reissues of all my favorite players.
Yeah, and they're cleaned up and you can
Right,
hear them
yeah,
actually.
exactly
You don't
right,
have to
yeah.
wonder what was going on. High school, did you go through the metal stage? Not metal as in
Yeah,
this
really.
metal, but
Well, you know, I really was a
high-speed
blues
rock and
man.
roll.
I was a blues man from the get-go, and I played in blues bands as a harmonica
Yeah.
player for many years. And it was years later that I just sort of bumped into the concept of a one-man band style. You know, Robert Lighthouse, a local musician, is a
Sure.
big influence on my music, and he introduced me to Dr. Isaiah Ross, who really plays this whole rig together in a really
Yeah.
cool way. And otherwise, it can be kind of silly, and it can detract from the music. But the way Dr. Ross played it, it really added to it.
That song that you played was Big Joe Williams?
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
Big Joe Williams.
What are you going to take us out with?
Okay, I'm gonna play a song called "Rock Me" by Muddy Waters, who's been covered by a lot of different players. And
Was
I'm going
this
to use
early in his career?
Yes. Yes. And yeah, although he still plays it,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of versions of it. I mean, it's obviously a traditional song that's been adapted, but depending on which lawyer you pay for the song, for my CD, I paid Muddy's lawyers. You can also pay BB's for this. But I'm going to use my Martin guitar, which has a nice low end, and
Right.
it's very going to be fit this song very nicely.
What year is that?
This is 1990, so it's not too ancient.
Fairly
but
recent.
It's settled in.
Indian rosewood.
It's settled in, yeah.
I'm always checking out the rosewoods.
I think you like the bottom end on this.
Okay.
Great.
Take us home.
Thank you very much. I want you to rock me. Baby, rock me all night long. And I said, I want you to rock me. Baby, rock me all night long. I want you to rock me, little girl. Yeah, baby, like my back ain't got no bone. I want you to roll me, baby, just like a wagon wheel. I want you to roll me, baby, just like a wagon wheel. You know when you roll me that way, baby, you don't know how good it makes me feel. Maybe you do, girl. We'll play some harmonica now.
a circle around the sun. Just all your arms around me, baby. Just like a circle around the sun. Don't let your man go, baby. Baby, till your work is done. Now, if you want to keep that good-looking woman, man, you'd better chain her right by your side. If you want to keep that fine-looking woman, man, I suggest you chain her by your side. You know, 'cause if she flags this train, man, I'm sure gonna let her ride. I want you to rock me, baby. Baby, rock me all night long. Said I want you to rock me, baby. Baby, rock me all night long. And I want you to rock me, little girl. Baby, like my back ain't got no bone.